a little bit of an interactive. Maybe we can just introduce ourselves in case there's people who don't, well, we haven't met. So my name is Sukaina Walji. I am from the University of Cape Town, and I'm the director of the Centre for Innovation and Learning Teaching Thought. Yeah, so that's me. I'll hand it over to Christina next.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Christina Hendricks. I am sort of in between. I'm on leave at the moment, but am the director of the Centre for Teaching, Learning and Technology at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, in Canada. I'll hand it over to Hoda.
Hi, I'm Hoda Mostafa, and I'm a professor of practice and the director at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo, Egypt, because there's another Cairo in the United States. All right.
Great. Okay, so I mean, we don't have very much time, so welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining this session. We wanted to kick off with asking some questions around your experiences in your institution around AI policies and guidelines, which is the topic of today's session. So there is the code there, it's menti.com, and there is the code 29664491. And there is a QR code. So maybe someone can put that in the chat.
Yes, I did. I already did.
Great. And then it's a very sort of small group. So I'll just switch over to the actual Menti. Okay. Sorry, I am trying to find it. Okay, cool. Let's just have a look at that. Okay. So, what happened there? Oh, there we go. All right. So we have little groups. So two of you don't have any institutional, organizational policies or guidance for the use of Gen AI. 5 yes and 2 in progress. Cool. Okay, three of you in progress. We'll ask a few more sort of more interesting questions in a minute, but this is to get a sort of temperature of the room and someone I don't know. Okay. I realize that we've put policies or guidelines, and it may be sort of one or the other or both, so we can unpack that a little bit more. Okay, I think we've had few responses there. So 5 no, 6 yes, 3 progress, 1 I don't know. Christina or Hoda, any observations on that full sample?
Just a little bit. So I think it's very interesting that there's almost equal amounts of yes and no's. So we, as I'll mention during my session or my part of the session, we're just finally kind of getting some out, and so I thought, oh goodness, we're very late. But I think it's interesting that there's a little bit of a mix here.
Okay, all right, we'll go into the next question. So this is for the 6 of you, I suppose. If yes, who has been involved in creating these, and have you been part of doing so? So yeah, feel free to write to the text box. Also, if you know, if you've got if you're working on things in progress, also please feel free to mention. We're just interested in, you know, what types of units or people are involved in creating these policies, given we're all in teaching and learning centers. Okay. All right, so we've got some responses coming up. So first one, Provost is currently convening a group to discuss developing a policy. Someone saying, I don't know who has been involved, I haven't been. Okay, so it's like a policy or guidelines came from on high. Have been part, CLT, some faculty, students, academic integrity committee, students, faculty together. I'm not sure, but I think university administrators, I wasn't part of developing the policy as a student. That's one response. Another response is our academic policy committee is made of temps, but they're mostly focused on not having students cheat with it. That seems quite familiar. Haven't been involved, and this one here around just given many sessions on the subject as well. This one, guide produced by SILT, yes, so probably know who that is. Now looking at collaborative developing a policy or framework. And the last one there, our faculty instruction excellence committee drafted them and gave them to admin. So thank you for those. Hoda, Christina, any observations? Please just come in and comment.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's so diverse. Like sometimes it's faculty-led or CLT-led. I don't see any student-led. But yeah, it's very interesting to see in times of flux, you know, who steps up. It's usually, you know, a committee and the CLT. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. One person saying they're not sure, you know, so it's kind of like a policy arrives, which is often something that does happen. And it's something that personally, I sort of think about in terms of how likely is it these things will be taken up if they just arrive. Okay, we can go on to the next question, which is, so if yes, what has been particularly helpful to you when referring to your institution's guidelines and policies? And I note I've missed an apostrophe there, so apologies for that. Also, if you haven't got your own institution policy, you're also welcome to say if you've used another institution's policy, what's been particularly helpful as well, if you'd prefer to answer in that way. Okay, we've got some responses coming in now. So the first one is, so in response to what has been particularly helpful to you, room for agency and spectrum of choices, would have hated a restrictive one-size-fits-all policy. That's really interesting. Next one is not applicable, refer to professional guild policy. Be good to unpack that maybe a little bit more. Assuming that means the person or people have been referred to another policy. Making sure that students are using AI ethically. I would be interested in a policy that does make sure that happens. But I suppose it's about signaling that. Guidance on how to reference the site AI use. Leaving the policy open for faculty to interpret. I think that means interpret them in their discipline or course. And then reminded of the need to corroborate AI output with verifiable quality sources. There's themes coming around academic integrity, I suppose. And then seeing Gen AI tools as having the potential for positive impact of teaching and learning and not only about stopping misuse. So these are the things that people are saying they have appreciated. Christina, Hoda, you want to come in?
Sorry, I just muted you accidentally. I tried to unmute myself. So I think there was a couple about leaving the policy open for interpretation and room for agency and spectrum of choices. And I found that one particularly interesting. And now I'm reflecting on what we've drafted and whether we've done that. I think that's really interesting. I also appreciate that seeing Gen AI tools as having potential for positive impact on teaching and learning, as well as having challenges and risks that need to be addressed. So that is something that we've been thinking about too. So a couple of those stood out to me in particular. Thank you.
Okay. Hoda, yeah. would you like to come in?
I'm just echoing what Christina was talking
Mhm.
about, this idea of respecting diversity of choice, because I don't think, even though it's been almost 18 months, maybe close to 2 years now since Gen AI has appeared in its full glory, I think that a lot of people are still very, there's a lot of hesitation, a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of, trepidation. I think that's the word I'm looking for around its use. And there will be also a lot of diversity to the students. And how do we address this from the student perspective to make sure that they are aware and safe from different approaches to use of AI in the classroom, and communicating this to students? I think, at least at our institution, the student piece is really lagging behind the faculty and the institutional kind of admin approach to it. So I think that's a gap that I'm seeing is not coming up much.
Okay, thank you. All right, and then we have the last question, which is our interest area as well. So what role has your Centre for Learning and Teaching or similar centres at your institution played in supporting faculties, lecturers, teaching staff, and students with Gen AI? Again, this is a sort of open text question. Oh, they're flooding in now. I'll start reading some of them out. So first one there is leadership and support and visioning. Then something more specific, creating model syllabus language. Multiple sessions per semester, so I assume that's relating to workshops and so on. This one is around holding student panels, workshops, and other events. Running a faculty community of practice that met every other week in the spring will continue in the fall. Holding conversations for faculty and occasionally for both faculty and students together, and other stuff. Yes. Other stuff seems familiar. Provided spaces to learn, workshops, communities of practice, and funded individual faculty development materials. Someone's saying here, not applicable. My university only recently created a centre of this type, so I suspect they will be involved in future development. Okay, running a series of workshops this summer, run training sessions. Then another one there about centres of health professional development for faculty and staff, led by academic technologists and structural designers. Helped a lot by workshops and updating us on new approaches. This is a interesting one. The head of RCTL is strongly against using AI. I'm in academic technology, but we haven't done anything since I've been here for 3 months. Okay. And then listening to faculty and updating resources when offered. And there's someone including AI stuff in MYFest and Equity Unbound. Okay, thanks. So that's quite a sort of range of roles. All seem quite familiar to me, especially in terms of the kind of responsive approach and giving out, someone offering free copies of Teaching with AI. Maybe we can, that sounds like quite a useful thing. Anything from you, Christina and Hoda?
I like the idea of a community practice that meets frequently to talk about things. That's not something that that we've done ourselves. Though we do have, I'll talk about this in a little bit, we do have regular weekly drop-ins, but it's not sort of structured as a community practice.
Okay. Okay, I think that's that's all the questions that we have. So I think thanks very much. It's given us, I think, a sense of where people are and what some experiences have been. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I think the structure of this is that the three of us will give a short presentation each, and then we have some discussion questions. So I actually can't remember whether we did an order, but Hoda, maybe you want to go while your internet's still good.
All right, thank you. All right. So the overview of the three of us is we're here to share what we've been doing, what our centers have been doing, what our institutions have been doing. So I'm going to quickly walk you through the overarching approach to what we've been doing since the beginning. And there is a small caveat that we started very early, and I think Maha being a key person at our center was instrumental in that as well, because she was very, very active in pushing this forward from the very beginning. But one of the things I've noticed is that because it's so quick, when you start early, you have to keep refreshing and renewing and coming up with new ideas. So to your point, Christina, that policies coming in 18 months later, that's not a bad thing. You get to benefit from all. We had to do a lot of learning on our own. It was like no man's land for us. So it was an interesting experience. And we, as a center, I think we learned and grew a lot. It was great capacity building for the team to have to do all of that. All right, so I'm very quickly, I just have 5 minutes, no more, hopefully I'll go through it very quickly. In our experience at the American University in Cairo, and okay, great, should be good to go. Please, Heather, let me know if anything goes wrong with my connection. All right, so American University in Cairo, our Center for Learning and Teaching, since the beginning, we've been, as with many institutional, I won't say disruptions, but tasks where the center is requested or asked to take the lead and spearhead, as with COVID in December actually of 2022, we started on our journey of putting together, let's say, a faculty preparedness plan. And I'm going to cover faculty preparedness. I'm going to talk a little bit about guidelines, resources, and our AUC statement. And I'll share all of these resources, of course, after the session. And we focused on more of a human-centered, faculty-centered, but keeping students in mind and embracing these diverse mindsets in our capacity building and our assessment. And then I'll talk a little bit about our emerging plans for the next year, and an AI community survey and AI hub that we're currently working on. So these are kind of the phases we went through, from just getting everyone prepared, building conversations, to building resources, guidelines, and taking it from there. For our guiding principles, we were lucky enough to engage with Elon University in the United States in sometime, I think, in mid-2023, where they shared with us some of their guiding principles. We also took a look at the Russell Group principles out of the UK that came out also very early in, I think, the spring of 2023. And we were trying to find some kind of, let's say, compass to help guide us in how we should approach something that was in flux, and also that our university had never really addressed fully. The Russell Group principles, we looked at those, and this was in line with how we wanted to approach AI, Gen AI, in teaching and learning, in assessment, as a faculty development center, as a center that focuses a lot of its work on assessment, and closely involved also in academic integrity. Over the years, we've all been involved at different stages, everything from training faculty on Turnitin to serving on multiple committees. So these principles really resonated with us as a center, and were in line with what we really wanted to do as a center in supporting teaching and learning at the institution. We looked at the guiding principles at Elon University. These were very helpful. We ran a co-design session with our students and faculty to see what they thought and how they could reflect and annotate and think deeply about some of these guiding principles. And we found them useful because they helped guide our priorities in where we should start. So we're starting with people, we're starting with faculty, we're starting with students, addressing their needs and making sure that teaching and learning is centered at the core of all that. We're very concerned with critical AI literacy, and Maha's also leading the charge on that, and she's been running multiple workshops with our faculty. I think we may have run, I've stopped counting actually the number of workshops we've run, building community conversations around key ideas and key challenges and key fears that faculty may be feeling as they are thinking about their courses and what they're going to be doing in the classroom. And that AI tools should enhance teaching and learning, and we should be framing it as such, with the caveat that not all faculty are ready to actually think of Gen AI as a tool that can actually enhance teaching and learning. And we've had several faculty really change their minds, a full 180-degree shift, and I know them by name. And this idea of integrating all sorts of educational technologies, and not just Gen A, as an experiential lifelong process. And of course, the research field, which we're not directly related to or directly responsible for, but to bring in these kinds of conversations, or to join in these kinds of conversations with more of a systems approach to looking at universities that bring in stakeholders from across the universities to have these kind of conversations. And I always say collaboration is hard. It's I think, the new superpower, the ability to convene and to collaborate and to cooperate. And this is a prime example of how Centers for Learning and Teaching are so well placed to facilitate and catalyze these types of conversations. So we ran community conversations, we ran workshops, we ran summer and winter institutes, fall institutes, a mix of small short workshops that people could attend at ease, to more immersive experiences that were 12, 15 hours of commitment. So these were across the board very well received by faculty. I think now we're up to at least 350 of our 800 faculty have attended at least one AI workshop in our preparedness plan. This has been, I think, one of the first things we focused on was preparing and building in this understanding of what AI actually was. We also issued an AUC statement, and I'll put that in the chat as well. And this statement actually came out of the Provost office that addressed all the stakeholders, researchers, students, faculty, and the community on the guidelines on the AUC statement on artificial intelligence tools. That was released very, very early from the Provost office. We also released a hub of AI resources on our website. We engaged with faculty on writing up how they are using AI in their classrooms in our new Chalk Talk newsletter. So that was very early on into the fall semester of last year and into the spring. And all of these guidelines are available on our website. They are under development this summer, so we are working on them over the summer to make sure that they're up to date. These resources go out of date very, very quickly, and they need to be constantly under review. And we have guidelines for faculty and students. So we produced 2 sets of guidelines for faculty. And under those, we really wanted to make sure that faculty had a short and sweet approach to how they can get ready for AI in the classroom, how they can talk to students about AI, what are some of the mini lessons and mini interactions they can have with students around AI, how they can redesign their assessments, and how they can cultivate literacy. And then most recently, we've been getting a lot of requests from faculty to how do I handle AI misuse? We're also developing a resource for that. One of our kind of also additional guiding principles has been putting good teaching and student learning at the heart of our faculty development, and centering backwards design, centering student-centered learning, centering instructional strategies in light of AI and not because of AI. So this is really back to the basics and bringing faculty back to why they love teaching and kind of avoid this fear of AI misuse and more embracing how AI could be beneficial for students in many instances. And then in our emerging plans, because I don't want to go over time here, is we're trying to embrace this versatile and certain complex and ambiguous world, this VUCA world that is, in our face, and we're really trying to move through it together, communicating as much as we can with faculty, communicating with students through our faculty. We have a faculty ambassadors program specifically targeting AI in the classroom, which has been a very rich space for faculty to really learn together and bring back their experiences through a co-creation and communication approach. We are developing 2 new resources, one for students. We're continuing to develop our faculty resources on our website, which are freely available and will be available in September. And then finally, we're hoping to build an AI hub for the university where we can bring everything under one space. Right now, we have a couple of new resources that are coming out in the fall that are still under development. I think the most important for our faculty is AI syllabus guidelines, and those are very broad and welcome and embody most of the faculty, let's say, personas on what they care about putting into their syllabus. So that will be coming out soon. And also a guide for how to handle AI misuse from our Academic Integrity Council. And a new student resource we're hoping also that we're going to be launching in the fall. So that's what I have for you today. And I'm happy to answer any questions after my co-presenters have presented their own perspectives on what their centers have been doing. Thank you, Maha, for putting all the resources in the chat.
And I've been adding those and also some other things to the document that I've shared in the chat too. So I think, Sukaina, maybe you were going to be next.
Oh, okay. I thought I was after you, but I can go. Just let me share
Doesn't
my
matter.
screen. Okay, right. Checking you can see my screen. Right. Let me just quickly, sorry, I just had the, okay. Okay. This is from someone who uses Teams, not Zoom very much. I apologize, just getting myself. Okay. So just in the interest of time, I'm not going to repeat too much, but like many other centers of teaching and learning, we've kind of been very much involved in supporting the University of Cape Town in understanding, responding to the challenges of generative AI. We got going at the beginning of 2023. Although this SALT is doing a lot of the kind of operational work, and we've produced a number of guidelines which are illustrated there, and there is a link. We're also hooked into the committee structure at the university. So, and I think that's quite important in terms of governance. And it is a little bit of a, this can be an awkward situation. I think different institutions would work differently, but even though I'm the director of the center, we've produced guidelines. Those guidelines are not binding. And I think that's just a kind of interesting observation maybe, and I'm not sure how other centers of teaching and learning work. So we produce guidelines partly because we were asked to by our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Teaching and Learning, through the committee that I chair, which is called the Online Education Subcommittee, and so on. So I'm making that point because depending on the kind of institution that you are in, and our university is quite a devolved institution where the different faculties, or it might be known as schools, really do make their own decisions. Sometimes having centralized approaches and policies is quite difficult. So what we have in terms of our structure is that we have a team in the center, which in 2023 met weekly, and that was partly as a first responder to the questions and queries that were coming in about generative AI, but also we felt it was important that our own staff were capacitated first. Like we needed to know what it is that we were dealing with generative AI, even though AI in education has been around for a long time. The sort of nature of generative AI, ChatGPT, that exposure, that take up, it did require quite a lot of rapid self-development and our own capacity building. So that really happened first. We thought that was important with really, our own professional development, sharing what we were learning, and so on. So that happened weekly, and then we started getting inquiries from different departments to come and just unpack what the issues are. So we did this sort of very early kind of generative AI, or rather ChatGPT 101 type of sessions. We went in to different departments and really just said, this is what this is. As far as we understand it, these are the kinds of things that you do. What is a large language model? What are, it's a very basic building blocks, things that have just become so prevalent in our sort of day-to-day discourse, but really in early 2023 felt quite strange. So we had quite a lot of those, and then we sort of solidified those into something that was more, we could go and run a sort of scaffolded workshop, and the outcome was, awareness, advocacy, understanding, and encouragement for people to try some of these tools and understand them better, so that in the teaching and learning space, they first of all, understood the impact potentially on their curriculum and on assessment and on their students. We then fairly rapidly, I think, produced a number of guidelines. Initially 3, 2 for staff, one particularly around assessment and academic integrity, and one for teaching and learning. And we also produced a guide for students. And these guides could then be shared around. Lecturers could share the student guide with their students, really as a sort of first pass at understanding the implications of generative AI. And then we have subsequently produced a more detailed staff guide on prompting and prompt engineering. And then even though our remit is teaching and learning, we were asked by our research office to assist with the guide for researchers as well. These guides have been around now for coming up to a year. I think they've been updated at least once, if not again. They do need to be updated, and they have been quite widely used. They are broad. I wouldn't say generic, but they don't go particularly into, as sort of deep disciplinary contexts. But they have provided, we think, a sort of useful place for people to go in the university. Along with the guidelines, we've had a series of activities, events, panels, guest invitations. No one is an expert in generative AI, but we have been trying to draw on people who are doing interesting things both within the university and externally. And we've also had a number of engagements with students. We made the focus of our teaching and learning conference last year assessment, with a strong artificial intelligence stream, which also helped with professional development and advocacy. And we endeavor to collect case studies and examples as well. It's quite interesting that today is the day that I'm giving this panel, because earlier this year we decided, and this is the group an institutional group that I chair, to start developing an AI in education governance framework, having had 18 months now of practices, youth awareness, advocacy, and we're really trying to unpack what that might mean in terms of a governance framework. And the university also is setting up an AI institute, of which our work would need to align. I am aware of time, so I'm just sharing this slide very quickly, which is from JISC in the UK, which is a suggested maturity model for education, an AI maturity model. And it's interesting, the bit yellow, where we have mapped where we are in a suggested increasing engagement with AI. And this is also quite interesting, just in terms of sharing with other people in the institution where we think we are and what kinds of activities we might need to do if we want to proceed into a more kind of operational mode with AI, which includes developing policies and institutional principles. And that's actually what we were doing earlier today within the institution, where we had a sort of 5-hour workshop and hence for some of us looking a little bit tired. Just some observations around policies and frameworks. So I think as preparation for developing a framework, a team of us have been looking at other frameworks and policies at other universities, and there certainly seems to be a focus from moving from a primary focus on assessment integrity to more of an AI ecosystem approach of looking at the whole ecosystem that supports teaching and learning and the kinds of activities that you need attention to in terms of policy and governance. I think it's necessary to have these policies and frameworks, but I don't think they're sufficient for AI engagement in an institution. So, a policy is just really a document, what is put around there to support. So I think in our development of our framework, we intend to have a kind of implementation plan or a roadmap at the same time that flags the resources that are required and the capacity to actually deliver on any aspirations in the policy. And also that the policy development should focus on iterative processes rather than the output. So I think the conversations that we're having now about what should be in the framework are as valuable as what we might end up with there. I'm going to skip over these, but we have, drawn on some policy and practice ecosystem framework elsewhere. This one by WCET, and recently EDUCAUSE released an interesting action plan for AI policies and guidelines, which we've been looking at, and ChatGPT yesterday helped me summarize the whole thing in the table, which is quite useful. And we were earlier sort of unpacking elements of this. So yeah, this is where we are at UCT in terms of the policy space. We are reviewing related teaching and learning policies and alignment, looking at whether we can change, shape, and adapt, or whether we need new policies, depending on what we are looking at. So we want to develop a framework using a co-creation model that involves as many stakeholders as possible, including students, and to consider at the same time evolving practices, what research we need to do at the same time, the staff professional development, and what students need alongside the development of this. So we see this as a kind of parallel process. And essentially what we want to do is think about what we are doing in all of this, which is to what extent we're keeping humans in the loop rather than out of the loop. And I mean, there are sort of values and principles attached to all of this as well. Thanks. I will stop there and hand over to Christina.
Great, thank you so much. I'm feeling some resonation in a lot of what's happening across both of you and also what we're doing at the University of British Columbia. And so I will share my screen. And make that, there we go. Are you seeing the slides and not the presenter view? Yeah, okay, good. It's like I have both and I can never tell what people are seeing. So I work at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, but we also have a campus in Kelowna in British Columbia in Canada. In Vancouver, we're located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people. And in Kelowna, that's located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. So just a very brief overview of the kinds of things that we've been working on. So we've been working on support. So I'll talk a little bit about that through the Center for Teaching and Learning, on both campuses. Governance, I'll talk a little bit about that and the guidelines that we've drafted and are not quite ready, not quite posted yet, but hopefully soon. And then very briefly about some funding opportunities and some technology that folks are working on. And let me just also say that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, I'm on sabbatical at the moment for a few months, but before that, until the end of June, I was in a one-year position as Vice Provost Teaching and Learning. It was a temporary role, and that's when I was involved in working on the governance and the guidelines. So I was not actually in the Center for Teaching and Learning during the last year, but I'll be going back to that after my leave is finished. So a little bit about governance at UBC around generative AI. The way we've structured it is, it's very hierarchical because that's what the institutions are often like. So at the highest level of governance, we have the board of governors, the senates, the provost, the executive. But we also have a generative AI steering committee, which is quite broad. It's made up of folks from multiple areas across the institution, from teaching and learning to administration to IT. So, lots of administration and HR things, and registration and student recruitment and student portfolio. So it's meant to be very broad across the whole institution to think about different kinds of activities across the whole institution. And then we've got working groups or subcommittees, and that's all the ones on the bottom of the slide. And this isn't even everything. There's gonna, I think, be one or two more. So just trying to cover many aspects of generative AI at the institution. I was co-chairing a subcommittee on teaching and learning, generative AI and teaching and learning, with a faculty member and a student. That has now completed its work, but I'll talk about it a little bit. There's one on graduate education, training and professional development, chatbots, LLMs, and one that is just starting up on procurement. So the chatbots and LLMs ones are really, the chatbot one is thinking about what kinds of guidelines and requirements and policies should be centered around the use of any chatbots at the institution, as well as potentially looking into procuring one or two. The LLM group is thinking about investigating ways to use or extend the foundational models in order to have them be used at the institution with privacy preserving data. The training group is thinking about any gaps that there might be in training. Even though we've got a lot, a lot of it is focused on faculty, a little bit less on staff, and I think one area that could use further emphasis is on students. So that group is looking at that. And then graduate education and teaching and learning are fairly straightforward, I think. The steering committee put together a set of very broad principles earlier this year that, as I'll say quickly on the next slide, are meant to connect to more specific guidelines. So these are just some of them. And on the bottom of the slide, there's a link to genai.ubc.ca/guidance. And that's where you can see these very broad principles. And they're meant to cover sort of lots of uses of generative AI at UBC. So thinking about copyright, accountability for results, privacy, confidentiality, information security, cultural bias and systemic inequities, harms from incorrect outputs, and ecological impacts. That isn't everything, but those are some of them. And they're very high level. They're worded in a very high level way on purpose, and meant to sort of be a foundation for other more specific guidelines. So in this table, or these two tables, is kind of meant to describe that. So foundationally, there are the policies and standards that already exist at UBC, and thinking about whether some of those might need to be updated. For example, I know for sure they're talking about updating the privacy and information security policies, but maybe there are others that need to be updated. And then there's those broad principles that are meant to be kind of foundational. And then, of course, there's legal requirements, let's say, around privacy and copyright. And then those are meant to underlie guidelines that are being created or have been created in other areas. So teaching and learning, which I'll talk about in a moment. Research has its own set of suggested guidelines. Data governance, graduate education, they're working on some. Procurement is working on some. And then, as I mentioned, guidelines for chatbots and LLM use. Still, a lot of this is still in development, so not ready yet. So just briefly on what the Center for Teaching and Learning has been doing. As I mentioned, I wasn't part of it last year, so I'm just reporting on the fantastic things that they did. There's a couple of websites, and I put these onto the Google Doc. So one is ai.ctlt.ubc.ca, which has all of the information about what the center has been doing. There's also information on the Academic Integrity website, academicintegrity.ubc.ca. So there's FAQs, there's syllabus language. In British Columbia, we have a fairly stringent privacy law, and so all of the tools that are used at the institution in any official capacity, particularly if you are requiring them for student use, those have to go through a privacy impact assessment. So there's information on which ones have gone through that. And then there's plenty of workshops and events. We had a big symposium back in, I don't know, I think it was November of last year. Celebrate Learning Week happened in May of this past year, which was a full week of lots and lots of sessions on generative AI with the theme Remembering the Human in the Loop. And there's plenty of hands-on workshops, including UDL and accessibility with generative AI, critical issues, assessment design, creating prompts, creating chatbots, and teaching materials. And then I think, as I mentioned earlier in this session, we have a weekly studio drop-in where people can just come and have conversations with folks in the Teaching and Learning Center to learn more and to ask questions. So last couple of slides. As I mentioned, I was in a temporary role as Vice Provost Teaching and Learning, and in that role, I was co-chair of a Teaching and Learning Advisory Committee on Generative AI. It was a dual campus, so both Vancouver and Kelowna had students, faculty, and staff, and representation from the CTLs, so both of the Centers for Teaching and Learning on both campuses, the library, the VP students portfolio, graduate education, associate deans, the Ombuds office, plus other faculty and students and staff. And their main focus, which is why it has completed its work, and also because I was only in the role for a year and wanted to leave the next person the ability to do as they wished, was to develop guidelines for generative AI in teaching and learning. And those were based on a lot of conversations in the committee. And also we did a bunch of consultations. So this committee ran from about October of last year until May or June of this year. We didn't meet in June, but we were still doing a bit of work. And the broad consultations included equity and inclusion leadership, accessibility leaders, Indigenous Advisory Committee, the Academic Integrity Advisory Committee, privacy, security, and copyright experts. We met with them multiple times. Academic leaders, so heads of departments, associate deans, deans, and the provosts, and then the Senate committees and the senates. So we did really wide consultation, and we already had a very broad committee. It was about 30 people to begin with. So these guidelines are not quite published yet. The final version was approved by the provost, and there's a link to the draft guidelines that we presented to the senates in May. But that's the only public version, and it's not quite the final version. But the topics include copyright and intellectual property, privacy, security, and confidentiality, and academic integrity. But one area that I haven't seen a lot of, and this is something that might be particular to Canada, though there are certainly many places with Indigenous folks. One of the things that came out in one of our very first meetings was the importance of talking about Indigenous data sovereignty and knowledge protocols. So we have a whole section on that and did multiple consultations on that section. Ethical considerations, including equity, bias, accessibility, and sustainability. And then we have a section on teaching with generative AI. So what do faculty do when they're teaching, both with their own teaching materials and also in asking students to use a generative AI? And then a section focused on students on learning with generative AI. And again, you can see the draft guidelines. They're pretty close if you go to the link on the slides, which I will post also in the Google Doc afterwards. And then lastly, some successes and challenges. We intentionally set up a large group with broad membership across multiple areas, and that was intentionally, even though it meant like not everybody could come to all the meetings because it was such a big group. We still needed further consultation and did a lot of consultation, and that significantly improved the guidelines, but it also took a good deal of time. So this was nearly a year-long process. We learned that many considerations are very complex and needed lots of discussion. We talked quite a lot in the committee about the use of AI detection tools, and we ended up with a guideline that says they are strongly discouraged, and you can only use them if they've been through this privacy assessment, which none of them have yet. The use for formative feedback and summative grading by faculty was also a topic of quite a lot of conversation. When we were drafting the guidelines, that made us notice we need more further resources and supports, particularly around student support. And then the question, I guess, is always on our minds, how to ensure these remain updated over time, which is still a complicated question. So that is it for me. We don't have a ton of time left. We only have a few minutes actually. So we did put some questions onto the Google Doc that has been shared a few times into the chat. If you want to add any thoughts of your own, but maybe what we'll do is we will ask for any questions for us. And if there's any time, we can ask one of our questions of you. So I will stop sharing. Thank you, everybody.
I think people can also, on the Google Doc itself, go in later and add their input to the questions on the Google Doc.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that would be great. Go in
Yeah.
some evening greeting.
I will share the Google Doc link again.
All right. So there's a question in the chat from Janet about the AI Hub. All right, so this is a initiative that one or two universities started in the Middle East, I think American University of Sharjah, and Harvard as a one-stop shop kind of place for the community that is driven by user, basically. So resources for students, resources for faculty, resources for the community, resources for alumni, resources for partners. And this is a very kind of broad aspirational goal. At this time, our resources are scattered. They're, hidden pages upon pages. We've been told we shouldn't be hyperlinking to all these resources, and that we need to trim down our external links. I don't know if this is a thing at your university, but our website team, we've been warned that we have too many resources on our website. So we're hoping to collect everything under one space that would have more of a collaborative input. Another opportunity for us, if we're not able to do that through our institutional website, because that's more rigid and it's not as flexible, is to create a Learn Hub very similar to our Digital Literacies Toolkit and our newsletter. That is also, it's a WordPress site that we can actually have more control over. My leaning is towards something that is more flexible, because websites are not as flexible as we'd like them to be. But that's kind of the purpose of the hub. People know where to go, because a lot of people, there's a lot of confusion. And especially for students, and this happens all the time, a lot of the student resources get buried and students can't find them. So it's just a one click for students. It's there. It's very easy to find and navigate. So that's the vision for that hub. Once it's live, I'll share. You're welcome, Janet. And the resources, yes, I love the resource document. Thank you, Christina, for starting to add them.
Sure.
I'm just thinking of what you were saying, Hoda, about the difficulty. We do produce resources and guidelines, then we complain that nobody looks at them, or the right people don't look at them at the right time, and so on. And it seems to be a kind of perpetual conversation, because the communication you know, at the university is so congested, you know, and people don't always read emails and so on. But we were sort of half tongue in cheek talking about maybe we need a bot interface for um for people to actually access some of our resources, and whether we can upload what we've done into some kind of chatbot that you know, people can ask questions of it, because you know we have a whole bunch of things and they're often written, I mean, I haven't looked at everything, but like in a sort of, you know, report or linear style. But sometimes people want to get to that one thing that they need to
And
know.
it's, yeah, they can't find it and
and
it
it,
drives them crazy.
yeah, and they can't find it, or it's in this one. And yeah, so I'm just wondering whether we can use the technologies that we're talking about to actually put a different interface onto some of those resources.
Well, the WordPress site has worked really well because with the way you can search it. So it's very searchable. So it's worked really well for us on our newsletter when people want to find things, and for our digital literacies toolkit. Yeah, knowledge base. Harvard and the University of Maine, and I think another university, I can't remember, have that kind of one-stop shop approach. It's just a link you go to, and then the channel, you know, it directs you. There's a user experience, a learner experience applied to it, a design applied to it. Yeah.
Maybe we can pick up on George's question around consultations and how we've so he's saying, please comment on differences between CTL views and senior leadership views on AI's role. Is there a winner or loser? I mean, that's a great question. Maybe from my perspective, I was quite surprised when you know, we were asked to kind of take this on as a sort of, you know, staff development, staff advocacy, how relaxed the executive leadership were around AI. So I was quite surprised that there wasn't so much of a panic. It was like, we know that this is coming and we know that it's going to be part of students' future work careers and needs to be part of the curriculum. We don't quite know how we'll get there, but we can work it out together. So I was quite pleasantly surprised with that initial approach. So I'm not sure that there's different views, because I think we've also gone into it as thought as we need to understand this more. We need to be critical about it. We've got a lot of understanding around it, you know, implementation of educational technologies and the problematic aspects of those. Got a history of that, and we need to look at this. What is the thing? Is it tools, technologies? What do we call it? So we've got into it from that point of view, but we certainly haven't, fortunately, had a particular, you know, pre-digested stance that we are expected to operate and roll out. So I think that's been quite good from my perspective. And if that answers your question, George. You know, if Christina or Hoda want to come in.
No, I would agree that there's just sort of from our perspective, I think the senior leadership has recognized that different areas are going to have different expertise on the various ways in which AI might be used, and sort of leaving those areas to think about that and to develop ideas and develop practices and guidelines, and then bring those to their respective leaders to you know, approve or feedback and things like that. So that's been really wonderful. And I know we are out of time, actually. So there's a question for me in the chat, and I'm happy to address it, but we probably should officially close out the session, I suppose, and then I can address it afterwards if anybody wants to stay.